Hello and welcome to the fourth video in this tutorial on how to make a Hexflixel planet defense game. So in this fourth tutorial we will be making the enemy and making him move towards the planet. Now before we do that, I'm just going to fix up a few mistakes I've made in the previous episode. There's not many, but you know, I've made them. So in our player class, we've made it so that our player will flip left and right depending on whether our object's facing left or right. But we haven't actually told Hexflixel which way we're facing. So to do that, just go down here where you've got your if statement for the left key and just put in here facing, which is something that all Flex sprites have. It's a variable you can't see here, but Flex sprite has it, and it tells Hexflixel which way supposedly the sprite's facing. So obviously if we're holding the left key, we should say it's flexObject.left. And this will say, alright, well, yes, he's facing left, so we should flip it on the x-axis. And facing when he's holding right, the player should be flexObject.right. And just make sure you've imported flexObject up here. Another mistake we've had is in the player class. You mightn't have noticed it because it wasn't a, the effects weren't noticeable at first unless you didn't follow the tutorial exactly. And that's because of the way BODMAS works and everything. Our trigonometry methods here aren't being called properly because the order of operations isn't working right. So it's not a huge deal, you just need to change it so you have more brackets. So around angle from planet minus 90, you want brackets around there on both axes. You also want brackets around maths.pi divided by 180. And I think that should make it work properly. What was happening is, like, if you set the player to start at 90 degrees, it wouldn't start at 90 degrees because this function wasn't working properly because of the order that we passed everything in, because we didn't have brackets. But because we had it at a 0 angle, it was unnoticeable. Now that we've fixed up all of the bugs we've had in our program, this tutorial series, let's create the enemy. So just like we've done with the other classes, create a new file and save it as E enemy.hx. Now what we're actually going to be doing is, I wouldn't normally recommend this, but just to save time this episode, just copy and paste everything from the player class into your enemy class, and we're going to manually change everything in here so it suits the enemy class. It'll just save us a little bit of time. So the first thing we need to change is capital player to capital E for enemy. Now it's fine, we need an angle from the planet, we need the speed, this is all fine. We don't need a facing flip because our enemy isn't going to be, well, first of all it's symmetrical so you wouldn't notice it, and we don't need it to flip. Everything here is okay, but let's just change, we'll get rid of the walk animation and change idle to be attack. So our enemy is always playing an attack animation. Now before this episode started, I drew up this little enemy and animated him. If you want to see how I did this, you can see quickly in the previous episode where I draw the player. Basically I have 6 by 3 tiles and they're each 16 by 16. About that size is good if you want it to fit in our game and to be about the same size as our player. And then I've just drawn an animation for him. Now you want to export this, so navigate to the game projects file, planet defense, assets, images, and then just save it as E enemy.png. And yes, and now save it. Now if we go back to our code, we can change load graphic from player to enemy.png. And if you're not using 16 by 16 tiles, you can change that there. But make sure to leave true as true because that tells it that it is animated. Now, as you can see, I've drawn 4 frames for our attack animation. I think I actually want to call it idle. I want to call it the idle animation. That might just be better. So for the idle animation, I've got 4 frames. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's just put that in an array here. So in these square brackets, 0, 1, 2, 3. Now for the speed of it, at the moment this says 2 frames per second, but let's bump this up so it's a bit faster to a number like 10. And we want to get rid of the line that says that the camera, the hexflexel camera, should follow it, because obviously we want to follow the player but not the enemy. Now all of this code here, don't get rid of the super.update and the calculate position method, but we can get rid of all of this. Basically this is the input, and we don't want to manually control the enemies, we only want that for the player. So we can get rid of everything from their left key to this if statement with the shoot key. We can get rid of all of that. And the update method should just look like that. And we can leave the calculate position. Now if we save that, everything should work fine. However, you'll notice that we're putting, with our player, we want our player to appear like it's on the planet. That's why we say move out to the planet radius and then subtract 4, so it looks like he's in the planet a little bit. Now we want it so that these enemies fly in from, away from the planet in space. So to do that, let's just create a new variable, and let's just call it distance from ground. So the distance from the ground of the planet. This is of a type, so colon, float with a capital F. And let's just set this to be a number like 150 pixels. Now, see here where we've got -4, that's so it appears inside the planet a little bit. So we're going to the very outside, so the radius of the planet, and then we subtract 4. That's fine for the player, but we want it so it appears out in space. So just put here plus and then distance from ground. And then we want to do that for the y-axis as well. Just like that. So if you just want to quickly check, the calculate position method should look like this for the enemy class. So now that's fine, it'll appear, but we want it so that it descends towards the planet. We just don't want it staying up in space, we want it slowly coming towards the planet. So to do that, let's just create a new variable. So this speed variable here is for, actually let's just keep this speed float, but change it from 1, like we had in the player class, to a number like, let's say something like 18. And now what we will do is we will say distance from ground minus equals flexg.elapsed times speed. So basically this is saying get the distance from the ground and then basically move the player, the enemy, towards the planet at a rate of 18 pixels per second. Oh, it might not be per second, but you get the idea. Now if we go to the playstate class, let's just quickly test that this works by saying add new enemy, capital E, and we want the angle that it starts at, let's just say to be 45 degrees, and the planet to be this planet here, that planet variable there. Now this should create one enemy at 45 degrees to the planet, and it should slowly descend towards the planet. And if we look here, there we go, it's going down. Now, you can see here that it's moving towards the inside of the planet, and that's obviously a bug. And one other thing that I've done is I think I've changed the speed of the player, which is of course a bug. If you saw, it was moving incredibly slowly. So yeah, let's just change the speed here to be a number like 10. I think that's because we mucked up the calculate position function before. This wasn't working. So yeah, let's change it to be a number like 20. Now if we execute our game, you will see that hopefully our player moves and we have an enemy that's approaching the planet. Now we want it so that when the enemy hits the planet, obviously the enemy will die, and not in this episode but in future episodes that will be where we reduce the amount of lives the player has. So another thing you might have noticed is the speed for the player is still too low, so let's just double the speed and put it at 40. Now let's go to our enemy class, and we'll just make sure that when the enemy touches down on the planet, that we remove the enemy, so that in future episodes we know that that piece of code corresponds to reducing some score, some lives. So in here, just put if distance from ground. Remember, this is a number that starts at 150 and descends towards 0, as 0 being when it's actually touching the planet. Let's just say if distance from ground is less than 1, so 1 pixel off the radius of the planet, then let's just call kill, which kills this enemy and removes him from the screen. In future episodes, this will also be where we reduce the number of lives the player has. So let's just try and run this now. There we go, we've got our player moving, and he moves left and right properly, and the animations work right. And when the enemy hits the planet, it removes him from the screen. Now, that's fine, but we've got one enemy, and that's rather boring. So let's make it that we have more enemies that come down, more than just one. So to do that, we're going to have to go to our playstate class and create a new group, just like we did with the Pong tutorial. So right up here where we've got the planet and the player variables, just write their enemy group, colon, flex group. So we're creating an enemy group, and this is of a type flex group. Now, because we haven't used flex group in this tutorial yet, we might have to import that. So just put import flexel.group.flex group. Now that we're saying, alright, we're going to have to remember an enemy group, let's just put after it, set this enemy group to be equal to a new flex group. So actually remember to make this enemy group that we've allocated, make that a new group. Now here, where we add this enemy, we can get rid of this line and make it so that we're only adding to the screen the whole enemy group. That will add any enemies that have been put in the enemy group, that will put them on the screen. So now what we want to do is we want to create a timer that will put new enemies around randomly the outside of our planet. So to do that, let's just create a new flex timer. Because this is obviously something we haven't done in this tutorial before, just write import flexl.util.flexTimer, just like that. Now we can use timers in our code. So underneath everything else in your create method in the playstate file, just put new flex timer, and then in brackets for the arguments, it wants to know the time, how long it should be between each tick on the timer. So let's just say we want a new enemy every, let's say 4 seconds. It wants a callback, and this basically means it wants the name of a function, and it wants one of the arguments to be a flex timer. So that function can, for instance, cancel that flex timer. So let's create a new function down here, and we will just call it create enemy. So this function will be called when the timer, so every 4 seconds, ticks. So in here we need to have an argument called timer, and this timer will be equal to this timer up here. So in here we could say, timer.cancel if we wanted to, but we won't need that right now. Now up here we can say, alright, so what function should it call when it ticks? Well, it should call create enemy. And then how many times should it loop? So this could be once, and that would just say in 4 seconds create an enemy, but we want this to loop infinitely. So we can just put 0, and that says, alright, infinitely, every 4 seconds, create a new enemy. Now in the create enemy class, function, we will just say enemy group dot add, and then we're saying, so when it wants to create an enemy, in the enemy group, put a new enemy. Now it wants an angle, and we want this to be a random angle between 0 and 360. So to do that, we're going to have to import the random class. So write import flexl.util.flexRandom, it's like that, and that will give us lots of handy functions for generating random numbers. So in here we can just put flexRandom.int ranged, so give me a number that's random between 1 to 360. And then for our enemy class, it also wants the planet that these enemies should be focusing on. So in here we can just type planet, which is referring to the planet we created up here. Now if we save and run this code, let's hope it works. Right, there's one enemy. Let's just full screen this. Right, there's one, and it'll touch it and die. There's another enemy coming down. Here's another one. And every 4 seconds, it will generate a new one. So there's one there, and there's one there. As you can see, it's generating a new enemy, and it's placing it somewhere random. And this is pretty cool. So there's just one final thing I want to do in this episode, and that's make it so that, as you can see, when we launch our app, you'll see that it starts up with a screen that says Hexflexl. And that's fine, but if you're testing and testing and testing, it can get a little bit annoying. So to get rid of that, just go to your main.hx file, and here where it says skip splash ball equals false, just change that false here to be true. Now if you run your game, you will see that it starts off straight in our game. It doesn't have that loading screen. So thank you for watching this slightly longer tutorial. I'm going to be putting that this enemy class, a link to this. All of my code, by the way, is on GitHub, and you can follow along with the progress of all of my episodes, and you can see episode by episode the changes that I've made if you'd prefer to read my code at your own pace. So thank you for watching, and if you need any help whatsoever, you can contact me on Twitter with @5mixer. Thanks very much.